All right, well, there's no time like the present, so let's begin. Good evening, everyone. My name is Sonia Bloom. I am the Communications and Environmental Coordinator with Foothills Forage and Grazing Association. I'd like to welcome you guys to our Soil Health webinar series. Tonight's webinar is on adaptive grazing principles and implementation with Dr. Alan Williams. Now, I'd like to start by apologizing for our technical issues on Tuesday and thanking everybody for your patience and for joining us tonight. We did a practice run this afternoon and everything was perfect. We didn't have any issues. And Alan is presenting from a different location, so we're really hopeful that we're not going to run into the same issues we did on Tuesday. Alan had tried to connect using 3 different methods, and Zoom had just decided that he wasn't allowed in. So unfortunately, we had to reschedule. So thanks, guys, for being here with us tonight. Now, if we do end up having some technical issues, then we'll start with shutting off Alan's camera. And if that doesn't work, then he can call in and we have his presentation loaded and ready to go. So we'll be able to continue on. So with that, Alan, can you switch to the next slide? I just wanted to point out that tonight's webinar series is brought to you from 3 associations that are, we are Applied Research and Forage Associations. So we have, next slide please, Alan. We have the Lakeland Agricultural Research Association. They are located in eastern Alberta and was founded in 1991. LARA's mission is to conduct innovative, sustainable, unbiased applied agricultural research and extension throughout Lakeland. Next slide, please. Okay, we have the Foothills Forage and Grazing Association. We bring producers together by finding profitable and regenerative ways to produce forage and livestock in southern Alberta. We were founded in 1972 by forward-thinking ranchers and are still going strong today. Our mission is to assist producers in profitably improving forages and regenerating their soils through innovation and education. Next slide, please. And we also have the North Peace Applied Research Association. They operate in northern Alberta. They work to meet the needs of their local farmers given their unique climate, geographic, and soil conditions in the Peace region. Their mission is to confidently provide applied research and extension to encourage a healthy agricultural industry. Now, if you guys are interested in becoming a member or have questions about any of our organizations, please reach out to each one of us respectively. Tonight's webinar, sorry, Alan, next slide. Tonight's webinar is a 3-part series, the first of which was Soil Building Secrets with Ray Archuleta on August 4th. Tonight's webinar and a final webinar on September 1st with Gabe Brown at 7 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. On another note, Foothills Forage and Grazing Association and the Lakeland Agricultural Research Association are both hosting soil academies in the summer of 2021 with Gabe Brown, Dr. Alan Williams, Ray Archuleta, and Shane New. If you want more details on those, please reach out to either Foothills or Lakeland. All of our webinars are being recorded and they will be available afterwards on all 3 associations' websites. And just some housekeeping for tonight. If you guys have any questions, please just put them in the chat box or in the question and answer, and we will get to them at the end. Alan's presentation will be probably around 50 minutes, and so that'll give us lots of time for questions at the end. Now, with that, I turn it over to Alan Williams.
Thank you, Sonia. Appreciate it very much. And again, if there are any issues this evening, then I will switch to phone and switch through the slides that way. We do apologize for the technical difficulties that we had on Tuesday evening. Tonight, it's quite impossible to cover everything someone would need to know about adaptive grazing in a 45 to 50-minute session. So my goal tonight is to hit the high points of what adaptive grazing is, what it can do for you, and how to best get started, some strategies to start with We do have more than 300 that are signed up for this evening, and as with many of our webinars, a lot of people sign up and then watch them on their own time. But also, as Sonia indicated, this is going to be recorded, and so you can go back and watch the webinar as many times as you would like. So to get rolling this evening, again, we're talking about successful adaptive grazing, and a lot of times I call it adaptive stewardship grazing because it is about stewarding what we have been put in charge of and are responsible for. One of the things that we're able to do with this type of grazing is achieve a very, very high level or degree of finish on grass-finished beef by using adaptive stewardship grazing. As you can see in the pictures here, this is USDA upper two-thirds choice and prime or Canadian AAA type beef. Again, you see another example of what can happen when you're using these types of grazing methodologies and strategies. So adaptive stewardship, as I said, is what I like to refer to it as, because we are stewarding what we have been given responsibility over. And I want to start with this quote, and this is actually my quote, but nature will humble you, and if you refuse to be humbled, nature will defeat you. In other words, nature always wins. And right now, across North America, we've got many, many examples of that. We have severe drought. We have some people that are flooding. We have maybe dual hurricanes coming up through the Gulf next week. We have significant wildfires occurring out in the western U.S. So there's a whole host of things that are occurring right now. And what we want to do is we want to work with nature to be as resilient as we possibly can. I love this quote by Wendell Berry. It was in a New York Times op-ed in 2018, where Wendell said, agricultural choices must be made by these inescapable standards: the ecological health of the farm and the economic health of the farmer. And then this quote by Masanabu. Masanabu, I consider him to be basically the Wendell Berry of Japan, very wise individual. And in this quote, he says, an object seen in isolation from the whole is not the real thing. And unfortunately, in agriculture and farming and ranching, and in our agricultural science, and even in a lot of nutritional and medical science, over the last few decades, we have been making this mistake over and over. We have been viewing a lot of objects in isolation, and that has divorced them and our ability to be able to recognize and understand the whole. And so this evening, we want to focus on the whole, because when we see the whole, that allows us to be able to determine what's going on with all the parts and pieces that make up that whole. I do want to give you a handful of helpful resources this evening that you can go back to and utilize in learning more about adaptive stewardship. First, the Carbon Cowboy series. You can locate that on the website carboncowboys.org. We've got 9 films that are present on the website right now. All of these tell the real life stories of farmers and ranchers across North America. And we also have one from the UK, and more are in queue and will be released in the future. We have quite a bit of material, resource materials on understandingag.com and also our soilhealthacademy.org websites. We have a lot of articles and blogs, archived webinars, and you can get a list of our upcoming webinars as well that you can sign up for. We have quite a few videos, a recommended reading list, And on the Soil Health Academy website, as Sonia said, we will have some academies next year, next summer up in Canada. But we have a list of our upcoming schools in the near-term months, as well as a bunch of other resources. And we've been working for a number of years with the pasture project of the Wallace Center, and the Wallace Center is part of the Windrock Foundation. And one of the things that we did was we developed a 42 video series that covers most aspects of adaptive grazing. That's available to you free of charge. You can watch those as many times as you want. They're all basically anywhere from 3 minutes to about 15 minutes in length, depending on the topic. We also have decision calculators that are available for you, additional webinars and PowerPoint presentations that are archived. And we've done a number of research trials dealing with adaptive grazing and with cover crop and livestock integration into row cropping scenarios. And we have those research trial results published, and we have additional trials going on as we speak that will be published there as well. Also, the Grass-Fed Exchange website has a host of excellent material. We have every presentation recorded for the annual conferences for the last 10 years are available on that website. Now, one of the first things I want to talk about this evening is what I call historical ecological perspective. And this is very important. We need to understand what the historical ecological perspective is for the area that you farm or ranch in. And the reason why is because if you understand this, then you get a far better idea of what you can restore your ecosystems to. And what we tell people in North America, practically anywhere in North America, is that you've got to go back at least 300 to 500 years to be able to get a proper perspective on what your landscape was like before we had major European intervention, before the fur trappers came in and significantly altered the beaver populations and altered the water across North America, before, the massive hunting of the elk and bison and so forth, and before the plow touched the prairie, all of those types of things. So you want to go back at least 300 to 500 years or even longer to gain a proper perspective of your area, to understand what it was like, and hence to understand what it can be again if we just apply the proper principles and practices to that landscape. Now, this picture, this is actually a video, but we found that our videos are not working very well. I took this at the CS Ranch in northeastern New Mexico. We were teaching a Soil Health Academy out there in early June. And in a single mob, we saw elk, mule deer, white-tailed deer, and antelope all running together. And here's another picture of that mob of all four of those species running together. Now, again, if we can go back several hundred years, this would have been a common scene across North America. It looked very much like the Serengeti in that respect, where many, many different species were active in the same landscape. Now, I do have the question up here, what keystone species is missing? And of course, that would be the bison. So if the CS Ranch actually had bison, and the bison were in this picture as well, then you would have got a much, much better picture of what would have happened on this ranch 300, 400, 500 years ago on this same landscape. And we do know that where this ranch was located in that whole region was the favored hunting ground for quite some time, for hundreds of years, for the Comanche. And the Comanche guarded it very, very jealously because it was such a very vibrant hunting ground. They also have bird species there. Here's some turkeys, but they had, prairie chickens, quail, a number of other ground nesting species. So we saw multiple bird species that would have been a part of this landscape with the grazing, browsing, and foraging animals as well. And I love this book by Wayne Angus Ferris. He basically explored the Rocky Mountain region from 1830 to 1835. And here's a couple of quotes from his book. The top quote says, "Bison that were in poor flesh were the worst diet imaginable. But as they became fat, we grew strong and hardy, and now not one of us is ready to insist that no other kind of meat can compare with that of the female bison in good condition." Now get this, and this is what we have found with our pastured proteins. This second quote here is, and we market to a lot of restaurants, fine dining restaurants, and in this second quote is very, very similar to the things that we hear from our chefs in these restaurants about grass-fed beef and pastured pork and pastured poultry and lamb. And so Angus Ferris says, with it, we require no seasoning. We can boil it, roast it, fry it as we please, and live upon it solely without bread or vegetables of any kind. And what seems most singular, we never tire or disrelish it, which would be the case with almost any other meat after living upon it exclusively for a few days. So again, he's indicating that when these animals are in excellent flesh and they have a really good varied diet that they're partaking of, then this meat is absolutely fabulous, and you can prepare it any way that you want, and it's going to be very good. The other thing, and we'll talk about this a little later in the webinar tonight, is the phytochemical richness that we find in these meats as well that are absolutely fantastic for our health. So the first thing that we always deal with are the 6 principles of soil health. And you need to ask yourself every day out on your farm, out on your ranch, am I making sure that I am adhering to the 6 principles of soil health? You got to know your context, minimize soil disturbance, keep the soil armored or covered, increase diversity, living roots in the soil as long as possible, and integration of livestock. Now, Gabe's going to cover a lot of these much more in his webinar, so I'm not going to spend time on the 6 principles tonight. But what I do want to say is that one of the major things that we want to do is protect the soil always. And you see in these pictures here, they were taken at the same time in adjacent fields in the same summer, where we had cover on the ground and shading through plant leaves and all of that. The soil temperature was 87 degrees, but where the soil was exposed, it was 107 degrees. And I can tell you that a couple of years ago, we were up in northern Alberta, and this was with a Soil Health Academy that Nora was hosting. And even up there, and I believe the ambient temperature was in the high 70s that day. We were out in the pasture, but where we found spots that were exposed to the sun, the temperature had already reached 125 to 128 degrees in the soil, even though the ambient temperature was in the high 70s. And we've seen soil temperatures go as high as 140 to 150 degrees. This is another example of that. I took these pictures earlier this year at a farm right here in Mississippi. The ambient temperature that day was 85 degrees. These guys had been conventional grazers and were transitioning over. And so prior to this point, they had been set stock grazing, and you can see the results of that in the picture, where the cattle had grazed down tight. At 85 degrees air temperature, the soil temperature was 109 degrees. but where they had left tufts of grass, the soil temperature was just 78 degrees. So we always want to make darn sure we're protecting that soil temperature. It's just critically important for everything that you do. So that's my first helpful tip for this evening. Make darn sure that in your grazing each and every day, you're leaving plenty of protection, plenty of residual to protect that soil moisture and soil temperature. The other tip that I want to give you is hope for the best, but prepare for the worst. This is critically important. We don't know what's going to happen in any given year, and even if a year starts off well, it can turn pretty bad on us, and we've noted that in many regions in North America already this year. So, prepare for drought, prepare for heat, prepare for flooding, for whatever may occur, so that if it does happen, you're ready for it and it's not catching you by surprise. And then if it doesn't happen, you're in fantastic shape. You've got nothing to worry about. This is a perfect example of that. This is down in the Chihuahuan Desert. This is Alejandro Correa took these pictures. The bottom right is a picture of Alejandro's ranch. The top left is a picture of his next door neighbor's ranch after the same 6 inches of rain, which was their sum total for the year, by the way, but after the same 6 inches of rain. So exactly next door ranches, and you can see what the unprepared rancher, what his ranch looked like, and you can see what Alejandro's look like. So again, being prepared can make a huge difference in how your soils, your plants, your microbes, and your livestock respond. I love Andre Voisin. He was a famous French biochemist and grazer, and he died in 1963, but in one of his books, where he talks a lot about grazing, he makes these statements. He says, overgrazing has little to do with the number of animals that you're grazing, but rather far more to do with the amount of time plants were exposed to the animals. If animals remain in any one place too long or return to it too soon, they overgraze certain plants. And we see this over and over and over, and many, many grazers make these same common mistakes year in and year out. They either keep their cattle or sheep or whatever they're grazing in a pasture too long, or they try to return to it way too soon before it's fully recovered. And this is the result. This is what you see. These are examples of what happens under conventional grazing. And in our travels throughout the US, Mexico, Canada, and other places, we see this far, far too often. Again, examples of overgrazing, which also causes us to have to feed a lot of supplemental feed stuff. And there's no supplemental feed stuff, including hay or baleage, that is ever cheap. All of them are very expensive. So Voisin goes on to say that one cow grazing a 10-acre paddock all season in a set stock or continuous grazing can actually end up killing thousands of plants over that season. An example of what Voisin calls overgrazing, yet being understocked. But in contrast, 1,000 cows grazing that same 10-acre paddock for just a portion of a day will not kill a single plant. As a matter of fact, those 1,000 cows grazing that same 10-acre paddock under a short duration, high density graze will actually facilitate tapping of the latent seed bank, and we'll see a lot more plant species come up and grow and respond. So adaptive grazing, as we define it, is a form of grazing that allows us to be fully adapted and flexible to ever-changing conditions. It produces the greatest results in the shortest period of time. We have never failed to see this. If you do this right, this will happen. And we see this over and over again no matter where we go in North America, no matter the environment, no matter the precipitation, no matter whether you got heat, you got cold, whatever. And the time period here to see significant results, and again, this is repeated over and over in every region in North America, is about 3 years. We will see from the very beginning of adaptive grazing to where we see highly significant results, it's about a 3-year period. And you're going to see incremental results in the interim between then, but by year 3, you're going to have profound results if you do this right. We also have found that a number of us have been doing this anywhere from 25 to 30 years now, and none of us have hit a threshold yet. So we don't know where that threshold is, and that's the good thing. We've been able to make continuous incremental progress over a span of 2 to 3 decades without slowing this progress down, and it allows us to achieve the highest levels of profitability. So the keys to adaptive grazing are that it's goal-oriented, and we can tend to multiple goals at the same time. It's predicated on stock density or pounds per acre and not stocking rate. Stocking rate is acres per head or head per acre. But this is all about pounds per acre. Management and flexibility are key, as are frequent movement and frequent rest. We want to focus on complete plant root system recovery. We'll talk a little bit more about that towards the end of the presentation this evening and what that means. And in many areas of the world, it's highly reliant on temporary fencing technology. But we work across a lot of large landscapes with clients that have anywhere from a few 100,000 to over 1 million acres on their ranches. And we have been able to effectively use herding to do the same thing that we can do with temporary fencing technology. So there's many different ways to do this. So what we're trying to do is to establish a fully functioning carbon cycle. And to do that, we want to simulate nature, the way that nature did it many hundreds and thousands of years ago. Again, the reason for the historical, ecological context. So this is a scene from South Africa that this picture was taken in 2018 by a good friend of mine, Dr. Jason Roundtree. This is a wildebeest migration, but this would have been very similar to scenes that we would have seen here in North America with our bison, elk, and antelope migrations. So what we want to do is mimic nature using biomimicry and ecomimicry. We can use our domesticated livestock to produce the same impacts that were the result of these wild ruminants that once roamed North America by the hundreds of millions. And I said that stock density is one important component of this. And so I'm just showing you what several stock densities look like. Upper left, that's 100,000 pounds. Upper right, that's 250,000 pounds per acre. Bottom left, that's 500,000 pounds per acre. And bottom right, that's 1 million pounds per acre. We do all of these stock densities and many, many more variations of stock densities some of the time, but no one stock density all of the time. So I want to caution you on that this evening. Do not pick a stock density and think that's the magic, that's the silver bullet, and you need to stick at that stock density from this point forward. The very moment you do that and pick a stock density and stick with that, you have become prescriptive, formulaic, and non-adaptive, non-regenerative. You will find that you will hit a threshold, a wall, a ceiling that you then will not be able to push through. And it's because you made this formulaic or prescriptive rather than adaptive. Now, this is a video, but again, we're having trouble with the video showing on Zoom. So what I was showing in this video, this is at our farm in Alabama, and we have 650 head of grass finishers here in this paddock. You can see them at the back of the paddock, and they're getting ready to be introduced to the paddock, and that's the grass that you see in the foreground. Now, it's hard to tell from the picture, but when you get into that, we have dozens of different plant species in that paddock. And then if we go to this next picture, that's when the cattle have been turned into this next paddock. And as you can see, in most of these steers and heifers in here in this picture, we're weighing anywhere from 900 to 1,000 pounds to give you a reference. Okay, so these are not 500 to 600 pound stockers. These are finishers averaging about 1,000 pounds or a little better at the time this picture was taken. So you can see the height of the grass that we were turning them in on as we were finishing them. And again, some more pictures of the same group of cattle. In the bottom middle picture, I want you to note the birds in the background. We have tremendous bird populations and many different species of birds that are following these cattle every single day on their moves. The white birds, the large birds in the background are snowy egrets. They eat a lot of flies and other insects. We also have brown cowbirds that follow our cattle everywhere on every move, as well as wood swallows and other species. So I want to discuss with you and introduce to you this evening what we call the 3 rules of adaptive stewardship. And if you understand these rules, just like the 6 principles of soil health, if you apply these 3 rules underneath those 6 principles, you will be successful. The first one is the rule of compounding, the second, the rule of diversity, and the third, the rule of disruption. No matter what you are grazing, whether it's cattle, beef or dairy, whether it's pigs, whether it's poultry, whether it's sheep, these 3 rules apply to every species that you might graze. So let's start with the rule of compounding. First, we got to realize that there are never, in nature and in biology, there are never any singular effects. Everything that happens out there has compounding, cascading consequences. And these effects, not only are they never singular, they're also never neutral. They are either positive or negative in nature. So the decisions that we make on a day in, day out basis, how we graze, determines whether we're going to create positive compounding effects or negative compounding effects. This also applies for epigenetic effects. And if you haven't heard of epigenetics before, epigenetics is simply the effect of environment, our climate, nutrition, disease, injury, toxins in the environment, use of chemicals, whatever, but the effect of our environment on the degree of expression of genes in an organism. So epigenetics are compounding in nature as well. They're never singular. And they are also positive or negative, never neutral. And what we do on a day in, day out basis impacts whether we're creating positive epigenetic effects with our livestock, our plants, the microbes in the ground, and our wildlife, or whether we're creating negative epigenetic effects. So obviously, we want to make sure we're creating positive ones, because not only does this affect the current generation on the ground, but it also affects many generations to come. Epigenetic effects are transgenerational in nature. The second rule, the rule of diversity. Nature wants complexity and diversity, never ever a monoculture. The only creature on the face of the earth that creates a monoculture is us, man. Nothing else in nature creates a monoculture. So, and when we talk about monocultures, I'm not just talking about monocultures of plants. I'm talking about monocultures of insects, wildlife, bird species, microbes in the soil, livestock, and so forth. So nature wants diversity and complexity. And we want to make sure that we're facilitating that within our fields, within our pastures. So what we want is we want to see at least 3 of the 4 major plant functional groups present at all times in our pastures. And I've given you 3 of them here today: grasses, legumes, and forbs or broadleaves. And the 4th one is woody species, including trees, brush, those types of things. And frankly, I like to see all 4 in our fields, and we encourage that because we get far better performance. And I'm going to talk about why in just a little bit. When we have complexity and diversity of plant species, then it produces very positive compounding and cascading effects. We also know from the work of Dr. Fred Provenza and many of his colleagues that diversity in plant species produces this incredible array of phytochemicals or phytonutrients that we call secondary and tertiary compounds. And these phytonutrients exist by the thousands in every plant, and they are medicinal and anti-parasitic in nature. So if we have diversity of plant species out there, our livestock can self-medicate and they can self-deworm. And the secondary and tertiary compounds also help to ward off flies and other things that may, and other pests that may bother our livestock. So monoculture and near monoculture pastures create a whole host of problems for us from an external and internal parasite standpoint, and even from a health standpoint that we don't even think about. And again, Fred's work has proven this. More than 40 years of research plowed into that. When we have diversity in plants in our pastures, we also have diversity in our microbial species. This is critically important for nutrient cycling and building soil aggregate, creating high levels of water infiltration and retention. We build diversity in the macroorganisms, and these impacts are exponential rather than linear in nature. Now, these forbs that I talk about, that one functional group, are commonly called weeds by a lot of people. And so, but we have to ask ourselves, what is the purpose of a weed? And how do we define a weed? I ask this every time I do live presentations anywhere, and I get basically the same definitions of a weed no matter where we go in the world and ask this. But every single definition is always subjective in nature. No one, even weed scientists, have never been able to provide an objective definition of a weed. In other words, whatever we call a weed is in the eye of the beholder. We determine individually what's really a weed and what's not. And there's many weeds that grow out there that provide this whole host of benefits. And Gabe, in his webinar, I'm not going to steal his thunder, but he's going to go through a list of a lot of different plants that we call weeds in North America, and the many or myriad beneficial benefits that they provide for us. So what we have to ask when we see, quote, weeds growing out there is, what is nature trying to tell me? And the one thing that we have to realize is that these forbs, these weeds, are nature's first line of defense. They're the plant that's going to grow first when the soil is scarred in any way, from overgrazing, from tillage, whatever the scarring may be. They're the plant that's going to grow there first, and for a reason. They're the plant that is best suited at that point in time to heal what is wrong with that soil. But yet our first thought is what? I got to kill these weeds. I got to spray them, or I got to till them, or whatever. I got to mow them. I got to get rid of them because they're damaging. And my livestock won't eat them. Well, that's the other thing. We have found that livestock will eat virtually every plant out there if you teach them how to do that. And we've been very successful at being able to do that. And again, many of these forbs or weeds are highly medicinal and anti-parasitic in nature, so they're actually beneficial for the livestock to eat. So diversity is key, and we certainly want to encourage that. We want to manage for diversity and don't sweat the weeds. Okay, we can always outcompete the weeds by the way that we graze. And oh, by the way, we can outcompete brushy species by the way we graze as well. So this is some of Fred's work, Dr. Provenza's work. I'm going to present some of the things that they have found, and a lot of these are in his book, Nourishment. So if you haven't read that, I encourage you to read the book Nourishment by Dr. Fred Provenza. And he also has a very recent article that is getting ready to be released called Let Feed and Food Be Thy Medicine. And he covers a lot of this in more detail in that than I'm going to cover tonight. But what Fred has found, and we have found the same thing, so certainly what we have observed corroborates what Fred has found in his research. And that's that landscapes with diverse arrays of plants are actually nutrition centers and pharmacies with vast arrays of phytochemicals. And nothing is more important for the health of our plants and our livestock through nutrition than landscapes with a variety of foods. And these foods are for both our herbivores, our livestock, they're for omnivores, they're for carnivores, both above and beneath the soil surface. The other thing that we have found is the health of our livestock improves immensely when they're able to graze a broad mixture of plants, some of which contain tannins and many other phytochemicals. Here's some of the things that we found when we have greater diversity. They gain weight far more efficiently. They have far less sickness. They produce less greenhouse gas emissions, including methane. And they can reach slaughter weights as quickly as animals in a feedlot when we have far more diverse pastures. This is an example of Russian olive. It's pretty dominant in the upper Midwest. I've seen a lot of this in southern Canada, in many places, especially the central provinces. And many people say that livestock won't touch Russian olive, but as you can see, that's not true at all. On the left-hand side, that was right after turning the cattle in, and you can see they went straight. They were turned into this brand new paddock. They went straight to the Russian olive and started working on it. And then 4 hours later, you can see that, the tree was completely denuded. The other thing that we find is that when we have far greater diversity and complexity in our plant species in our pasture, morbidity and mortality in our livestock decreases quite significantly. Now, here's something that you may not have realized, and this is also something that you can talk to your vegan friends about. Plants actually are sentient beings, just like our livestock, our cattle, our sheep, our goats, whatever, and us. Plants are sentient beings. They see different wavelengths of light, which they capture through photosynthesis. They breathe through the stomata on the surface of their leaves and stems. They smell, taste, talk, and listen in their own biochemical language. They can smell and taste compounds in the air and on their tissues. They can hear and respond to the sound of a caterpillar or other pest chomping on a neighboring plant. And at that response, they can produce volatile compounds that alert other neighbors to the danger of the pest insects. And this even attracts insect predators that will then come and forage or predate on the pest insects. So the plants themselves can signal that if we have enough diversity in the plant species out there. It's when we have monocultures and near monocultures that we are seriously limiting the ability of our plants to smell, taste, talk, listen, hear, and all of this. They can even recruit animals to perform vital services such as pollination and seed dispersal, and they can deter herbivores from eating too much of their tissues. So plants can do all of this. And the plant roots themselves are obviously alive and sentient as well. They interact 24/7 with fungi and bacteria in the soil. And collectively, the roots with the microbes in the soil are known as the plant microbiome. And root exudates, they attract, they deter, they even kill below ground insect pest herbivores, nematodes, and other microbes, and inhibiting competing plants. So when we have diversity, all of these things can function far, far better versus low diversity type pastures. Cells and the plants they make up have knowledge of themselves, just like the cells in our bodies. These cells receive environmental challenges that lead to changes in form, function, and behavior of the cells of the plants. We have noted this over and over. The exact same plant species, the exact same grass, can have a totally different morphology when they are in a much more diverse, highly microbially active environment. And the morphology of that plant is far better. It creates more biomass. It creates a finer, more velvety texture to that plant. And the livestock are far better attracted to it. So the leaves are wider, broader. We now have noted a number of plants like dandelion and various clovers and grasses that we now call Jurassic plants, because their leaves, the size of the leaf material of that plant is so much larger than we've ever seen it before, that it's rather staggering what we're observing out there in that regard. And then the third rule, the rule of disruption. Nature has tremendous resilience and responds well to challenges, and therefore we can introduce what we call planned purposeful disruptions that can create a host of positive compounding and cascading effects. And the analogy I like to use here is that of a human athlete. So if any of you listening tonight were athletes or have been an athlete at any point in your life, you know that as an athlete, to compete at a very high level, you have to constantly change up your exercise routine, duration, intensity, so forth, frequency, all of that to continue to make progress. If you do exactly the same exercise routine, the exact same way, day in and day out, you're going to hit a wall. You're going to quit making progress, and then soon you're actually going to start going backwards. You're not even going to be able to maintain the same level of athletic performance. So it's the same way with nature. We're biology. We're dealing with biology out here in nature. And so to build resilience in nature, to build strength in nature, we've got to introduce planned purposeful disruptions. So again, if we're formulaic and prescriptive in what we do, if we want to follow a recipe over and over, we are going to hit a wall. We are not going to be able to continue to make progress. So we've got to look at introducing these planned purposeful disruptions. And the first way to do that is to not do things the same way every time. Adaptive management is not a rigid routine, recipe, or formula. And the very moment that you turn it into that, you are no longer adaptive. You may still call it that, but you are not adaptive anymore. So how can you be disruptive? Well, in grazing, here's some of the ways. There's many other ways that we can be disruptive, but one is to purposefully alter stock densities. Remember earlier I told you don't pick a stock density and rely on that stock density and do that stock density over and over. I call it pulsing of stock density. So we want to purposefully alter stock density. Secondly, do not move your livestock through your farm or your ranch in the same pattern year in and year out. You know, if you start in pasture A every spring and then go to B, C, D, and E, change it next spring. Start in pasture D or C. Alter that rotational pattern. It makes a difference because of the cellular memory that every cell of every organism has. Alter grazing heights on and off. Do not always turn them on at the same height and pull them off at the same height. That's a recipe, that's a formula, that's a prescription, and it will cause you to hit a wall. And oh, by the way, if you do that one thing right there, if you constantly go on at the same height every time, or a very similar height, and come off at a similar height, you will narrow the plant species in your pasture. It will be impossible for you to develop more diversity doing that. As a matter of fact, you do just the opposite. You'll narrow the number of species in those pastures. Another thing that we have found to be vitally helpful is alter rest periods. So again, don't always think that you've got to come through and hit every paddock every 35, 40, 45, or 50 days, or whatever you may do. You need to purposefully alter rest periods. And what we have found is that purposefully giving much longer rest periods to select paddocks each year is hugely beneficial. If you are like us and you graze multiple species, then alter the species order through those pastures from time to time. Don't graze them in the same species order every time. Another disruption, alter the time of season or of the year that you're in a particular area of your farm or ranch. Don't always hit pasture A in May, okay? Hit D in May, and then wait till June to hit A. So alter the time of season or year. Another thing that works very well is alter paddock configuration. So even if you're grazing the same area, by altering the configuration of that paddock in that area from time to time, you can produce a very positive disruption. So the best tool in your toolbox is this: constant, keen observation. And use all your senses when you're observing: sight, sound, smell, touch, and yes, even taste. Taste your plants out there. It'll teach you a lot about what's going on. Smell the soil, smell your plants, pluck the leaf material off various plants and roll them around in the palm of your hand, and then smell what that plant material smells like. And that aroma will teach you a lot about what's going on. The taste will teach you a lot about what's going on. Observe the soil, observe the plants, observe the insects, birds, livestock. And the reason you want to constantly observe is because constant observation develops intuition. And when you develop really good intuition, you will make better decisions. So we want to make sure that we're observing every day and observe everything. Again, here, when we were on this particular farm with these new clients, we were teaching them how to observe. And one of the things that we found, remember I mentioned earlier, differences in plant morphology among the exact same species. That's exactly what we found on this farm, where they had higher levels of biological activity. The exact same grass species was entirely different in its morphology. Every one of these three pictures here is the exact same plant species, the same grass. The one in the middle was where the cattle had consistently grazed down tight. And the two on both the left and right-hand sides were where they had left tufts of grass around manure pats, and we had significantly higher biological activity. The grass was, again, the exact same species of grass, was entirely different. And these were just a few paces apart. So observe everything: manure pats, the condition of your cattle, the insects, the birds, the spiders, the pollinators, the soil. And what are some helpful tools that you can use? Well, we like to use these very high-tech, very expensive tools, like a shovel. So always carry a shovel with you. I never go anywhere without my sharpshooter in my truck or in my side-by-side. They're always there. and I'm constantly digging in the soil to see what's going on. So take divots out of your soil about a foot deep and note what you're seeing there. Are you seeing earthworm activity? Are you seeing aggregation, or are you seeing compaction and plating and crusting of the soil surface? So note what you're seeing, what's happening in the root development of your plants and the root structure and so forth. A thermometer is very handy, and this can be an infrared or thermal thermometer, and everybody's been using those lately to, point at your forehead to take your own temperature for, this COVID deal over the last several months. So infrared thermometers are being used much more, but they're very easy to use out on your farm or your ranch. And do this frequently. It will surprise you what's happening out there in terms of soil temperature. A refractometer. You can buy a refractometer for $80, $100, $120, a good one. These are excellent instruments, measure plant bricks. And plant bricks tells us a lot about the nutrient density in those plants and our anticipated animal performance. And I've got a lot of data relative to that. I've got articles out on that you can read that'll go into a lot more detail on plant bricks and how to use it. Water infiltration ring, a simple 6-inch in diameter, 6-inch long ring. It can be cut from a section of irrigation pipe. It can even be 6-inch PVC that you bevel on one end. You just simply drive these 3 inches into the ground, 3 inches out, to allow you to accurately measure water infiltration rates in your soil. There's quite a few. If you Google single ring infiltrometers, you can find quite a few videos on YouTube that tell you how to do this. It's very easy, but it's a very, very useful tool. So use all 4 of these tools and use them routinely. They will teach you an awful lot about what's happening and whether you're producing positive or negative compounding effects. All of these are cheap and easy to use. The last thing that I want to talk about tonight before we go to questions is what I call the microbiome. And there are striking similarities between the microbiome of us, humans, animals, plants, and the soil. Now, I don't know what your religious beliefs are, but I'm a Christian, and when I read in Genesis what we were created from, and we were created from the soil, then from that very beginning, we all shared the same microbiome. And again, scientifically today, so whatever your belief is, as a scientist, this has been verified and corroborated. The microbiome in truly healthy environments and ecosystems is practically the same. There's very, very little difference between the microbiome on and in humans, animals, livestock, plants, and the soil. So that being said, we need to learn how to work with that. And we need to understand that they're intricately linked in either a symbiotic or antagonistic relationship. Therefore, what happens to one inevitably affects the other. And these interactions actually produce epigenetic effects that are either positive or negative in nature and are also transgenerational. So when we think about this microbiome, it's critical that we understand that what we do and what amendments we apply, supplements we feed our livestock, all of that impact these microbiomes. And that can create antagonistic relationships from the soil to the plant to the animal and ultimately to us. So if we understand this microbiome and we understand that the microbiome is similar among all organisms, then we also understand that it takes biology to grow biology. I cannot grow biology in my soils through mechanical or chemical means. As a matter of fact, I'll actually damage the biology through both of those. It takes biology to grow biology. So if I'm producing my livestock in a way that that microbiome in their gut and that microbiome in their saliva and that microbiome on their hair coat that they're constantly shedding as they move across and graze across your field, that biology is then communicating with the biology in the soil and creating what we call quorum sensing, microbe to microbe communication, which is exactly what we want to happen. The other thing we have to understand is that biology grows out. The ripple effect is much like throwing a pebble in a pond. When you throw a pebble in a pond, ripples form and the ripples continue out all the way to the banks of that pond. Biology does the same thing. This is the way we restore grasslands in the desert. We focus first on areas where we have higher biological activity and then grow that biology out across the landscape. So what I'm going to tell you tonight is that you need to be doing the same thing. So on your ranches, instead of focusing first on the worst areas, focus first on what we call the low-hanging fruit, the very best areas, and grow that biology out. Your worst areas, they're the worst areas because you have very poor biological activity and very low diversity. So it's going to take a lot of effort if we're focusing on them first to really make a difference there. Rather focus on the best areas, get them even more productive, and grow that biology out into the worst areas. You'll find that far more effective, far more efficient, and far more economically beneficial. And this is an example of that in the desert. So everywhere that we have manure deposited, we get these little micro ecosystems establishing themselves even in the desert. And you can see that around these manure pads. In the bottom right-hand picture, we identify areas like this in the desert where you have some grass growing that's indicative of higher biological activity. You can see beyond this grass, as you look towards the upper part of that picture, a whole lot more bare soil. So we focus first on these areas and ripple or grow that biology out to those bare areas. And believe it or not, this works exceptionally well. And again, as I said earlier, is far more efficient. So one of the things that we want to pay attention to when we're grazing is the amount of leaf volume we allow our livestock to remove on any one graze. If we don't allow them to remove more than 50% of the total leaf volume, then our root growth stoppage is only about 2 to 4%, and our plants can recover fairly rapidly, and we're protecting soil moisture, soil temperature, microbes, everything. But look what happens if we go just another 10% and we go up to 60% leaf volume removal. We've now jumped way up on root growth stoppage. We now have 50% root growth stoppage. And if we go above that, we can get as much as 100% root growth stoppage for a while. And you see the similar in the diagram on the bottom right comparing grazing method A to grazing method B. We see a number of negative compounding cascading effects in A and a number of positive compounding and cascading effects in B. So some final tips that I'm going to leave you with tonight, and then we'll go to questions. Number one, combine herds into a few herds or flocks as possible. The more you try to run, the more difficult it's going to be to graze adaptively. Make certain livestock have the nutrition they need each day. That's first and foremost, okay? And you do this through making sure that they have enough forage dry matter to consume that day in the paddocks that you construct for them, and by making sure that they've got adequate plant bricks. Next, do not let water be your roadblock. Water is an investment, not a cost. Investing in water always pays if you're grazing livestock. So don't let water be your roadblock. Invest in additional water. And we've got a lot of presentations that deal with that you can avail yourselves of. And then finally, selection and culling are very, very important. Make sure that you're selecting for animals that are adapted to your environment, that have really good longevity or have superior soundness and superior fertility. So select and cull appropriately so that you can develop livestock that thrive in an adaptive grazing environment. So to end, I want to mention that some upcoming schools, we do have soil health academies occurring in September at McIntyre Farms in Caldwell, Idaho. This is going to be a multi-species stacked enterprise type school. And then we have an advanced grazing school coming up in Alabama in October. And then we have other schools coming up as well. You can go to soilhealthacademy.org to see when those are going to be. And as Sonia mentioned, we have several schools coming up next summer in Canada. We also have an upcoming webinar that you may be interested in. This is going to feature Alejandro Correa, and he's going to talk about how they turn desert to oasis in the Chihuahuan Desert using regenerative ranching practices and adaptive grazing. This will be an outstanding webinar, and I encourage you to sign up and attend that. So, Sonia, I'm going to turn it back over to you to any questions I'd be happy to try to address.
Excellent. Thank you, Dr. Alan Williams. Before we go into questions, we just want to say thank you very much for your presentation. It was a pleasure as always to hear from you and learned a lot of great things. So let's jump into the questions here. The first one was, Alan, could you speak a bit about stockpiling summer grasses for fall and winter grazing?
Okay, very good question. And as a matter of fact, we've been quite successful at being able to do this pretty much in every region in North America. So whether you're down in the deep South like I am, or whether you're located out west or the upper Midwest or in Canada, we've been able to successfully stockpile warm season perennials and annuals that we can then graze very effectively in the wintertime. Now, one of the best ways to be successful with that, though, is first developing diversity. So if you're going to plant a warm season annual, plant a highly diverse annual, and that'll give you far better results for stockpiling and grazing in the winter. But the same thing with your perennial pastures. The more diverse they are, the better they're going to stockpile and the more nutrition you're going to have in the wintertime. If you've got monoculture or very low diversity, warm season perennial pastures, it's going to be more difficult to appropriately stockpile and to have the level of nutrition that you want in the winter. Now, I know many of you in your environments that are on this webinar tonight, you typically have C3s or cool seasons all summer long, and you can certainly stockpile those for grazing in the winter. Most of you that are listening are in snow country, so you want to have plants that have a tall structure to them and not just low growing plants, because the taller plants that grow more erect and put on just a little bit more stem are hugely beneficial in the wintertime. As you get snow cover, it allows those animals to be able to see those plants up above the snow and to then follow those down, to burrow down through the snow. This is what, the bison did. It's what the elk and the antelope and the deer did and still do in that type of country. So that helps enormously, and your cattle will learn very quickly how to burrow down through the snow. And we've got quite a few clients, and of course, Gabe Brown, one of my partners, does this as well, that the livestock actually are utilizing the snow as their water source through the winter as well.
All right, thank you for that, Alan. Next question is, when starting out with a typical East Texas pasture, would you start with a cover crop mixture to jumpstart the diversity of the microfungi biome, or just adaptive graze and let nature take its course?
Okay, very good question. And, I've been in East Texas many, many times. And so what I'm imagining here is we're going to have a low diversity pasture. There's probably going to be a lot of Bermuda grass or Bahia, Dallas grass, things like that that are going to be present in that pasture. Maybe fescue, end-of-fight infected fescue. And so low diversity. And many of those pastures just historically will have been significantly overgrazed. So with that overgrazing, you've got low diversity, you've got compacted soil, you've got poor soil microbial activity. So in those situations, what we like to do is to use a very complex annual mix to overseed into those pastures and give us a jump start. That is our biological stimulation, or what we call a biological primer. So oftentimes we will go in and either broadcast or drill in, no-till drill, a highly diverse annual mix in there so that we can get some biomass production, get a lot of different types of roots in the ground, and start recruiting an array of microbial species and building that mycorrhizal fungi, those mycorrhizal fungi colonies. So yes, I do like to use a annual biological primer to get started in those types of situations.
Thank you. Okay, next question was, do you hay any of your adaptive pastures?
Okay, so the short answer is yes, we do. We are grass finishing 52 weeks out of the year, and we ship cattle to the processing plant and load lots 52 weeks out of the year. So we can't have any hiccups. we got to have cattle ready to go every single week without fail, or we're in real trouble. So we'll utilize hay and baleage strategically during the year if we need to supplement with. But what we do not do is we do not have designated hay fields. So every field gets a combination of, at some point in time, grazing and haying, and we move that haying impact around. So we try very hard not to hay the same areas year after year. So, areas that are hayed may get hayed, say, only every third, fourth, or fifth year. And a lot of times we're haying excess paddocks and grass that we're just having a hard time getting to because of the growth that we're having and the rotations that we're making. So again, yes, we do, but no dedicated hay fields and not haying the same field over and over. Every field gets at least one or more grazing impacts every single year.
It's a great answer. Okay, the next one is, are you changing pastures based on a specific distributive pattern, or do you change based on observation when moving?
So it's a combination. We have a plan, and we have a pattern each year that we set out to follow. But again, that pattern is altered for each year as one of our planned disruptions. So we'll move in a different pattern in different years. But again, it's adaptive. So as conditions change and so forth, based on our observations, we will, basically abandon our plan pattern, at least to a certain extent, and potentially skip over certain paddocks that we were supposed to be in next and move to a totally different location on the farm because we know based on our observations, we really need to go over there and graze that at this point in time. Perhaps it's because we've got maybe there's some problem plants growing in that area. And that's the opportune time to graze them to most effectively control them. So rather than waiting, we're going to take that opportune time in their growth stage to effectively control them. and go graze over there. So we do alter it based on observation.
Okay, thanks, Alan. The next one is, what is the easiest way to calculate your return on investment in adaptive grazing practices?
Well, there's a multiplicity of ways. One is obviously the amount of forage biomass you're producing. So as I mentioned earlier on in the webinar tonight, we do see a definitive timeline here. And remember, I said that by year 3, if you're following the 6 principles pretty religiously and the 3 rules, that by year 3 you see profoundly positive results. And when I say that, by year 3, we can see forage biomass production increased compared to year 1, 2.5 to 3 times, and sometimes even more than that. That has direct economic implications, because now I can graze more animals on the exact same acres. So that the economics of that are very simple, very easy to calculate and very easy to verify. The other economic benefits are the increase in plant bricks. So now my animal performance on a day in, day out basis is better. And just to give you an example from our data, we know that if we can increase plant bricks, say from an average bricks of 3 to a bricks of 13 or 14 in the same plant, same pastures, I'm going to get another 1 pound a day average daily gain out of those same pastures without supplementation. That has direct economic implications as well, and is easy to calculate because I've got higher average daily gain every day. The other economic benefit that I get is from the medicinal and anti-parasitic properties of these diverse adaptive pastures. So our animals are self-medicating. We're not having to spend money on antibiotics and treatments for our livestock. They're staying healthy. We're not having to spend money on dewormers and fly control because they're staying very healthy because of the diversity and the adaptive grazing practices that we're putting into place. And then over time, I can increase my stocking rate. So when you add all of those things up, plus add up the significant improvement in soil health, now I'm able to infiltrate more water and retain that water. If I end up in a droughty situation, I'm going to be able to graze far longer into that drought than any of my neighbors are, and likely all the way through that drought with either very little or minimal destocking, whereas my neighbors are going to do heavy destocking. That's a huge economic benefit. I'm not having to supplement through the drought. Likewise, if we have very wet conditions, my pastures are able to hold up under those wet conditions because of higher levels of soil aggregate, and that allows us to be able to continue to graze even under the wet conditions without destroying those pastures. So those are some of the key economic or financial benefits that we observe and that we're able to calculate and verify.
Awesome, thanks. The next question is, do you have any suggestions about managing grasses on different soil types? And the example that was given is such as gumbo clay versus sandy rocky ground.
So yes, we have worked on every one of those. Our farm in Alabama is in gumbo clay, okay? Very heavy clay. So, as a matter of fact, the saying down there is that if you stick with your soil, it'll stick with you. And, if it's muddy and you're walking around in that, you'll be 6 inches taller pretty quick. So yes, and we've worked in very sandy soils, rocky soils, you name it, all types of soils. The key, no matter the soil type, is as rapidly as you can encouraging and developing plant species diversity. Okay, so whatever you have to do to encourage and develop that diversity is critical to being able to work in any type of soil and improve any type of soil. And then putting that higher density, short duration, longer rest period animal impact onto that diversity. Those are the two keys. And they have worked in every type of soil type and every type of environment pretty much equally well. If you're having difficulties and issues with being able to get a response from, let's say, interseeding annuals into your paddocks, then those are things that I encourage you to reach out to us on an individual basis, because we're going to have to ask you a number of questions about your specific context to be able to come up with the right solution for your particular situation. So again, for anybody on tonight, you're welcome to contact us. Contact us through Kathy with a K at understandingag.com. And Kathy will make sure that we either, if you want to do it via email, I can handle it that way. Or if you want to schedule a call, Kathy can schedule a call, and we can discuss your context and the solution that's best for you.
Thank you. The question is, I am very close to Uniontown in the Black Belt. What stocking rate do you think is achievable in this area?
Okay, so you're in the Black Belt Prairie, and you know, the stocking rates that are achievable there on a cow-calf unit basis, you can get all the way down to about 1.5 acres per cow-calf unit on an annual basis with little to no winter supplementation. And I know that because I've been able to do it, and there's others that have been able to do that as well. You know, it'll be hard to push it too much more than that without starting to supplement.
Thank you. The next question is, we've been trying to plant a wide variety of annuals into paddocks and have had varied results. Where we have no success is in areas with acid root mat, overgrazed for 150 years and now mainly covered in couch or bent grass. What could be done in these conditions?
Okay, so we've encountered, you know, situations like that. So familiar with that. One of the first things to do, quite honestly, in there is either during the summer, even though you have low plant species diversity, building as much biomass as possible, and then using ultra high stock density in very short duration to go in there and just, you know, I call it hammering the ever-living heck out of it, okay, with your cattle. Now, I'm not talking about destroying it, but what I'm talking about is ultra-high density, 500,000 pounds per acre or better for short duration, getting a very high degree of trample. Or you can bale graze on those areas as well to effectively do the same thing. You want to get a very high degree of trample, apply a lot of biology from the livestock, and apply a lot of manure and urine or fertility from the livestock. And we have found that that has been beneficial at helping us to be able to start to repair those types of situations. So I would encourage trying that. Again, ultra high density, short duration with a longer rest period, or bale grazing over that, accomplishing the same thing.
Thanks for that. This one is, she's from Canada, so we have had poor outcomes with direct seeding into perennial pastures. Any tips, or is spraying it out better?
Okay, so I'm not certain whether she is, when she's saying direct seeding, is that drilling in or is that broadcasting? But basically, whatever you do, there are several keys here. Number one, soil conditions at the time of, you know, planting the seed, whether it's broadcast, whether it's drilled in, whatever method you're using, is important. You want to have adequate soil moisture conditions, and you want to make darn sure that you get good seed to soil contact. So if you're drilling in, you know, you should have good seed to soil contact, but you want to calibrate your drill appropriately, make sure you have the right down pressure, make sure your drill is level. A lot of people don't pay a lot of attention to that, but you want the drill absolutely level. And make sure that you're not planting the seed too deep. Many times when people have a failure, they're planting their annual seed, these mixes, too deep, or even their perennial seeds too deep. For most of these, we tell people never go deeper than 1/4 to 1/2 inch. You'll have far better results. If you plant it like you plant corn or soybeans or something like that, you're going to go too deep and you're going to have far less results in what you're trying to accomplish here. If you're broadcasting it, again, you want good soil moisture conditions, and you want to be able to run your livestock at density across those acres shortly after broadcasting so that they can walk it in. And again, it's all about that good seed to soil contact. And of course, another key here is making sure that it's not being outcompeted by whatever you're seeding it into. So you can either graze it down tighter to remove the canopy, or you can mow it to remove the canopy. But if it's being canopied, then as soon as it comes up, it's dying out because it's not getting sunlight. It can't photosynthesize and all of that. So you've got to remove the canopy as well.
Okay, she did follow up saying no-till drill.
Okay, so if it's no-till drill, then again, the things that I said earlier, drill's properly calibrated, it's level, make sure that tongue is level, and make sure that you've got the right down pressure. And again, that seed is going in no more, I like to go in no more than 1/4 inch, but definitely no more than 1/2 inch. So, run a test strip and take your knife and dig down into the furrow and see how deep your seed placement is. Do not make it too deep. And again, under adequate soil moisture conditions when you're drilling in. And remove the canopy, right? You can completely shade it out if you've got a lot of canopy.
Thank you. Okay, let's go for 2 more questions. You mentioned self-medication. Are you not deworming your herd at all? And then what about type yearly vaccination?
Okay, yes. So, yes, on our cow herd, we're not deworming at all, okay? And haven't for more than 10 years now, nor using any fly control. We just don't need to. I wrote a very recent article. You can find it on understandingag.com under our resources tab, and you'll click on From the Experts. But it's called Don't Let It Bug You, 6 Steps to Controlling Internal and External Parasites. If you follow those 6 steps, you can eradicate the need for chemical dewormers and fly control. So that's available. Everybody can read that. And you're welcome to email or text or call with additional questions that you may have. Vaccines. We do use some vaccine, some clostridial vaccine, but on a cow herd, we're no longer using things like Vibrio, Lepto, respiratory, all of that. Basically, the only thing that our cow herd gets is a 7-way clostridial. A lot of people will call that a 7-way blackleg, but that's about it.
Excellent, thanks. And the last question of the evening, is there any benefit in leaving a multi-species pasture for a year ungrazed, or is it better to be fed off under a rotational grazing system?
Okay, very good question. And one of the things that we have found is that if you give a pasture, and obviously you can't do this across your whole ranch in a given year, so you got to plan. But if you give a pasture an entire year's rest, you'll be amazed at the results. They're very profound and profoundly positive. So we do like to do that. Now we pre-plan on that. And so what we do is that we know which field or whatever paddock we're going to give a year's rest for the next year. And what we do is the year prior, we make sure that the last graze that we get on that field is as high a density as possible with as much trample and fertility applied as possible, and then let it rest for that entire next year. And what we have seen is we have seen anywhere from a 2 to a 4 times forage biomass increase just by giving it a year's rest. And the other thing that we have seen is a significant increase in plant species diversity by giving it that much rest. So we have seen anywhere from 6 to more than a dozen additional plant species showing up in those year-long rested pastures.
Excellent. Well, I didn't see any more questions show up. So again, I just take this time to thank Dr. Alan Williams for being here with us tonight. I'm very excited that we had no technical difficulties. So thank you to you guys for sticking with us. The webinar was recorded, so you should be able to find them on Foothills, Lakelands, and North Peace Applied Research's website in the coming days. Again, you have Dr. Allen's information, so if you need to connect with him, please reach out to Cassie. And thank you guys so much for being with us tonight.
Thank you.